I'm Teresa Au. Welcome to In the Making, where I have conversations with creatives, solopreneurs, and experts that explore the challenges and the rewards of the creator economy. Emily Keegin is a photo director who has worked at magazines like Time, Bloomberg, Business Week, and The Fader. But these days, she's better known for her sharp critiques of contemporary photography on her Instagram stories. Seriously, following Emily is like an art history class, but only the fun parts. She makes the connections between a Taylor Swift portrait and vintage advertising, or looks at trends in food photography, or talks about what makes a magazine cover great. Most of all, Emily loves photography, has worked with dozens, if not hundreds, of photographers, and is always thinking about the future of the medium. I am so thrilled to have you here. Thank you for joining us today, Emily.
Thanks for having me. I'm so grateful to be here.
So let's start at the top. What is a photo director? What do you do?
What do I do with my life? Yeah, so my job is really to figure out the best way to tell a story or communicate an idea visually through pictures. And once I figure that out, my job pivots and becomes about executing that vision. It doesn't always work this way, but often that means finding a photographer, hiring a photographer, and the team surrounding the photographer, stylists, etc., and then directing them. And then once the shoot is over, I choose the images that I think work for the story, and then work with designers to place those pictures in layout. So every image that you see out in the world has been touched by a photo editor, photo director, and ushered into the world.
How did you get started in this type of work? Are you a photographer yourself?
I thought I was. I went to school for photography. I didn't know that the job of photo editor existed, but I had a friend who worked in the art department at Time magazine, and she told me that there was an opening in the photo department, and I applied for the job, and I got the job, and I began to learn about how all of the pictures that we see every day come into the world. I knew there were pictures, but I didn't understand how they got there. I don't know if that's still opaque to people in 2024, but in 2000, it was to me. And I kept thinking I wanted to be a photographer, but I really just love the collaborative aspect of working on this side of the process.
Yeah, I love that it's storytelling visually. So obviously, the biggest headline in photography right now, I think, is AI. Can you give us some historical context for technology and photography in general? Is this the first time technology has been controversial? Probably not.
The first time I thought about AI, my first instinct was just like, oh, here we go again. I think that people who are mid-career, like me, remember very well the move from film to digital, which began in the 90s. Mm-hmm. And we remember how things changed the way we saw the world, how images looked different, but how that change really upset the photographic economy and what it meant to be a photographer before and after digital arrived. So we all have a little bit of PTSD. And I think that the reason this AI moment reminds us so much of when digital entered and took over from film is that digital was marketed in the same way that AI is being marketed, which is that here is a technology that is faster, cheaper, and easier to use than the technology that we've been using before. But actually, this idea of having a technology that is faster, cheaper, and easier to use is at the center of the story of photography. When photography was born, it was marketed as a tool that you could use to create these great images faster, cheaper, and easier than painting. Mm-hmm. Now, that was a lie. It might be faster, but it's not really easier, and it's not cheaper than painting or drawing. But that was the marketing behind it. Throughout the history of photography, there are constant upsets. The first big upset is in 1880 with the creation of the snapshot camera. Before we had big cameras that were on tripods and they were heavy and you had to like travel with a small dark room with you, with the negatives were made of glass. I mean, this was a heavy medium. It was shrank down to become very small and very easy to use. It's marketed to children. And it's a single button and it's cheap.
Yeah.
And what's incredible is that every time we make these big breakthroughs, the knockdown effects are incredibly positive. Humans see the world in new ways now that they have this tiny camera that they can hold to their eye and move around. The eye comes off the tripod, right? We break the horizon line. We go to the top of buildings and look down from above. I mean, this is like a view we never had before, thanks to this new camera, right? That anyone can experience. That's a huge change in how humans perceive the world.
Mm-hmm.
The flip side is it upsets the market.
Yeah.
It puts people out of business. It has all of these other repercussions.
Yeah. So are you saying AI is similar, or what is your personal feelings about AI being part of the photography world now?
I guess the question is, what are we talking about when we talk about AI? I think about AI tools that are showing up in Photoshop, for example.
Mm-hmm.
Most of a photographer's process doesn't change that dramatically. Then there's another way to use AI where you prompt to create a whole image, right? Those are like two different things. AI is being marketed as the new photography. The core principle of photography is that it is a document of a real thing. At some point, this machine with a person attached to it stood in front of this item or thing or event and captured it. Now, there's a lot of conversation about what is truth and what is real and what, but at the basic moment, something happened that was real in real life, terrestrial life. AI is the exact opposite of that. AI is like drawing. It is not a document of something that happened. We've conflated these two mediums and they're very different things. I feel like what we're noticing with AI right now is that we are doing the same thing that we tend to do in photography when a new technology arrives. And we try very hard to shoehorn it into the space that was occupied by the old technology.
Mm-hmm.
Digital shows up and we try to make it do the things that film was doing before. And it's bad at doing that because it's a new technology and it has its own set of limitations and it has its own workflow.
Yep.
My hope is that as we begin using AI, we begin to understand how to use its limitations and its workflow in a good way.
Is AI the end of photography as we know it in terms of people trusting that a photo is, quote, real?
No, it's just the beginning of photography. I mean, I feel like we got really soft and dumb for like 100 years, thinking that photography was truth. Mm-hmm. It's never been truth. Even if it's not, quote unquote, retouched, it is the creation of an artistic soul using a machine. I mean, it's a little bit closer to truth than painting or drawing, but not by much. I mean, the amount of retouching and cropping and changing has been a part of the art since the beginning. And we all just want to believe that what we're looking at is truth, even if we know that it's been retouched. I think it's good that we have to have these conversations and that we have to be aware of the way photography is manipulated before and after AI.
Have you heard about the Content Authenticity Initiative? It is a group of companies and organizations that work to create an industry standard for digital content authenticity and provenance. The idea is to promote transparency about who made the image when AI has been used to create content and explains what changes have been made to the image over time.
A thing that happened when we moved to digital is there was a lot of outcry about authenticity, and wanting there to be a watermark or something on every image that was touched by Photoshop, which is a similar concern. And I think it's interesting that this is actually the point where people are like, actually, that's what we do want. We want to know if it's been touched by AI. I honestly think it's a little silly. For me, that's not where the ethics lie. But I think the ethics when it comes to AI are about how it's being built and whose work is being harnessed to create the tool and who is not getting paid for that.
Yeah.
And I think that's a very fair concern.
Are there aspects of AI that people aren't talking about, but should?
Bring in a new form of visual technology changes the way humans see the world. And when that happens, that's cool. Like, that's a good thing. I would like to see people talk about what this technology is going to do to the industry and what we will be losing as we continue to use it. The way that I keep hearing people wanting to use AI is to be able to create images without having to outsource part of that process. Because as retouching becomes easier, the marketing here is like, you don't have to send your images out for professional retouching. You can do them at home. Like, it's only cheaper for you if you're not paying yourself for your time. You're just eating that cost. So that cost doesn't go away. Also, you still have to pay for the software on your computer.
Yeah.
Every time you stop working with another person and do everything by yourself, you lose that collaboration. And that collaboration makes for better pictures. Like, when I retouch things with a retouching partner, it takes both of our minds to get the picture to the right spot. When I do it myself, I miss things every time. Art is a team sport.
Maybe the role of retouchers can change to acknowledge their expertise, that they can be more respected as creative partners and not just technicians. It's the collaboration with someone like you to make a piece of art better.
Oh, that's such a beautiful way of thinking about it. I hope that's what happens.
Since you work with so many different photographers, what are the biggest challenges to the industry right now? Obviously, a shrinking market for photography due to AI generated images is one concern, but what are some of the other challenges?
The lack of money. But, this was happening before AI. People don't want to pay for picture making.
And when you say people don't want to spend money, this is companies or magazines, or who do you mean by people?
Yeah, all of them. No one wants to pay to make a picture. Again, this is not new. Most of our beloved photographers from the 1800s and 1900s died penniless and alone. Whenever we, quote, democratize our medium in any meaningful way, the public devalues the medium a little bit. It's been harder and harder for me to convince people to pay for photography. And this is because they have great cameras on their phones. So they think that pictures are free. And they think anyone can take a picture because it's become so, quote, automated.
I mean, look at the advertising by iPhone. Their billboard says, shot with an iPhone. Even my kids can take beautiful photos with my iPhone. So I see what you mean.
Right. And the truth is they hire real photographers to take those pictures with their iPhone. But the words, the communication is like, you can do this, right? You don't need a professional.
Right.
I think you will, without question, have to see a shrinking of the field a little bit. There's just fewer dollars allotted.
Going back to what you said about hiring professionals to take photographs, for people who have never really thought about this, why do you need to hire a professional photographer?
Because photography is hard. I guess the question is, how many great pictures do you see every day? Like, really great, like stop in your tracks, like, oh my gosh, this picture is doing it for me.
Not a lot, you're saying.
Not a lot, right? Yeah. That's because it's hard. It's a hard art. If you are in my job, what I want to do is create those images that make you stop, make you feel something, that make you pause, or that can communicate a complicated idea through an image. And if that was easy to do, we'd be constantly seeing pictures and being like, holy smokes, you wouldn't be able to move. You'd be, we're surrounded by so many pictures. You'd be, if they were all great, you would like sit in your bed all day, overwhelmed. The most recent example is the Trump assassination attempt, right? What happened with photography on that day was that a handful of highly trained professional photographers were on site. Mm-hmm. And because they have been doing this for many years, they knew exactly how to cover that moment. That's why you hire professionals. I mean, I still can't believe the kind of imagery that came out of that day, because not only were these professionals positioning themselves while there's sniper fire,
they were in danger.
They're in danger. They feel the need to document the moment, and then they are able to compose a frame perfectly. Mm-hmm. Like, that's just not something we're born to do.
It's a skill, I'm sure, and with experience. What are the biggest opportunities for photographers that didn't exist before?
We are so saturated with imagery, and so much imagery looks the same because we know what works and what doesn't on our digital platforms. You know, we can trace, we have all the metrics. And whenever you're in a landscape like that, you have the opportunity to start breaking rules. And when you break a rule, people pay attention, they wake up from their slumber. So there is this opportunity, I think, for photographers to get really weird.
How has the ability of photographers to share their work on social media impacted the field? Is it easier for people to get noticed now?
For me, the greatest technology breakthrough in my career so far has been Instagram. In that, when I started as a photo editor in 2003, 2004, you know, I had like a printout, like a piece of paper with people's names and files that I kept images in. And I had like a Rolodex, and I would only find new people through word of mouth, or like I would take meetings all the time with these agencies. And so in order to be seen by me, you kind of needed an agency to get you in front of me. But there was this real barrier between the photographer and the person who gets to hire a photographer.
Yeah.
And Instagram and the internet in general blew that out of the water.
Yeah.
Much to the chagrin, I think, of agents. People like me who do the hiring have access to all sorts of different photographers.
So is it safe to say you've personally found people online and hired them?
Yeah, that's how I do a lot of my hiring. Yeah.
And how do you find new people online? You just kind of scroll through your feed,
Yeah,
or
it's mostly just an obsession. Yeah. So always looking to see who everyone else is hiring, you know?
And do you hire those people or look for people?
I like them.
Depends if you like them.
Yeah.
How do you find up and coming people that's not known yet?
Really through Instagram a lot. And then word of mouth is still huge. So people will reach out to me and I'll take meetings, and there are also portfolio reviews with graduating seniors and that kind of thing.
I know you do some trend forecasting, which is so fascinating to me. How do you figure out what's going to be trending next year, let's say?
Well, I'm not that precise, and I'm just constantly scrolling and looking at printed media. And then I'm just obsessed with history too, you know? So I'm just like constantly trying to figure out these data points and seeing how things fit in. I've noticed I've needed to kind of train the algorithm on different computers and different phones and such around my house. I'm getting different things on my Twitter on one machine, and then I have a different login for another one, so that I can like test myself, because otherwise I get in a bubble and I'll think something's trending, but it's just trending for me.
For you, yes. So smart. Yeah. Should individual creators think about trend forecasting? Or is this really just for really big companies?
That's a good question. I think that my hope for any photographer is that their first order of business is to figure out what their creative voice is and stay true to that. But I think it's important to have in your peripheral vision, what are the things that are becoming popular so that you can understand how to place yourself within that. I would say that the things that tend to change are not the bones of an image, but the vibes of the image. So great photography lasts. Like right now, there's this, or has been for a few years now, this trend of like very warm, gauzy, kind of yellowy pictures. They almost look like film, but they're not quite. They're kind of muted. That filter is trendy. You're still going to get bad or good pictures within that filter. So if you're a photographer who that filter as part of your artistic vision, you're like psyched because now you're making a lot of work.
Yeah.
But that filter is going to become unpopular. The hope is that how good you are at communicating with your subject, how good you are at telling a story, how good you are at composing an image, that's so good that it doesn't matter that the filter is no longer popular.
Yeah. I think that's great advice, to find your voice first for any artist, for any creative. So speaking of advice, what advice do you have for creators and solopreneurs who are not photographers about using photography online? That could be someone selling ceramics that they make, or advertising for their yoga studio, or showing off their outfit of the day.
I would say that you should pay someone to do it. I'm just a booster. I'm just a photo booster. I would say you should pay a photographer a lot of money. I think the first question I would ask myself if I was making images for my ceramics or my yoga studio is, what is authentic about my product, the thing that I want to communicate? What is it I want to communicate? And I would jot down a list of like the attributes that are related to my product. And then I would go and look at like a million pictures. What usually happens when you do this is that you start to realize that there's some images that you really gravitate towards. And then I would use those as my guide for the kind of imagery I would make.
That's sound advice. It made me think of when you said, look at tons of photos. What are your personal feelings about stock photography? Someone using stock photography versus creating their own.
Stock photography can be great. There's nothing inherently wrong with stock photography. The problem with stock photography is that often, not always, but often, your viewer will recognize it as stock photography. So if that's the case, what are you communicating?
It lacks the authenticity you talked about.
Right. And it's communicating that you're cheap. So if you are sitting in the subway and you look up and there's a banner ad and you've seen that picture before, which that is not necessarily the like thing you want your brand to be.
Yeah.
If you're using an image that also ran in your competitor's ad, like that's not ideal.
Yeah.
So it's not inherently bad if you have a great eye and go into a stock house and pick something that is like witty and cool. It's going to be witty and cool.
What are some of the mistakes you're seeing that creators are making with their images online?
We think that the best way to gain a following is to mimic someone who already has a following.
Yeah.
And that's a way. But if you want to make people stop and pay attention to you, you need to look different. Sometimes it's counterintuitive. Sometimes that means making a bad picture.
It gets people's attention.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
Where do you think photography is going? What's exciting and what's next?
I have this hope that AI is going to it's going to remind us about what photography is really good at doing that AI is not good at doing. And we're going to lean into that. Sending a photographer out to go capture something means sending a person out into the world to learn about the world and tell us about it. It's a human endeavor. We get confused because we have to use machines in the process, but really this is a human endeavor. And photographers whose work is about the moment and being out in the world, documenting the world, this is their time. This is their time to shine.
I always ask this question of all my guests. What is your one word that is guiding you for this year, for next year?
I think my word right now, I have to keep saying this because otherwise I just fall into a pit of despair, is just hope. We just have to hope. I realize that's not cool, but I think it's what we need.
I don't think human beings can exist without hope. Yeah. So thank you for sharing that word. I am hoping as well for a bright future. Thank you so much. It was such a fun conversation.
Thanks for thinking of me and having me on.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you again to photo editor Emily Keegin for joining me today. I love the historical perspective she brings to what's going on in photography today and how she's always advocating for photographers. Here are just a few of my key takeaways from our conversation today. 1, a great way to make sure you're seeing a range of inspiration is to have multiple logins for social platforms. The algorithm will give every login a slightly different feed. 2, if and when you're thinking about bringing photography into your business, invest time in exploring various styles to find what truly resonates with your brand's authenticity. 3, instead of mimicking popular trends, lean into what only you can do. Focus on unique, authentic expressions, even if it means creating unconventional or quote-unquote bad pictures. 4, AI tools in photography, while controversial, are part of a long history of technological advancements that reshape how we perceive and create images. Embrace the changes while maintaining the human element of storytelling. Thanks for listening to In the Making, brought to you by Adobe Express, the all-in-one content creation app included in your Creative Cloud membership. If you like this episode, be sure to leave us a rating and a review and subscribe in your favorite podcast app. I'm Teresa Au, and I'll see you next time.